Welcome to the Super Healthy Human Podcast with your host, Dr. Roger Murphy.
Hi, this is Dr. Roger Murphy, your host of the Super Healthy Human Podcast. I'm delighted to have my friend and colleague, Dr. John Dempster, who is a board-certified naturopathic doctor and the founder of the Dempster Clinic Center for Functional Medicine. Dr. Dempster is a functional medicine doctor who focuses on treating patients by finding the underlying causes of their symptoms. He has a special interest in GI disorders, digestive disorders, autoimmune disorders, and he has a strong passion for helping patients embrace an optimal aging philosophy where he supports them achieving a longer, healthier, and more fulfilling life. I'm really delighted to have him here. We're going to be talking about some GI disorders, some things that you can do to help yourself in your quest to feel good again. Dr. Dempster is going to be sharing some information that I think you're going to find very, very helpful. So welcome, and let's get started. Hey, John, thanks so much for coming on, being a part of this podcast. I've been looking forward to this for a couple of weeks, and I'm glad we're able to get our schedules to sync. I know you've got a really busy practice, but I think the topic that we're going to be talking about, this gut health, is such a needed topic, because I think people who have gut issues, whether that's with reflux or SIBO or any of the IBS, any of these things that are out there that are affecting them, it can be just so frustrating to go see a GI doctor and kind of walk away with a diagnosis like colitis or something that really doesn't do them any good, right? So I'm so glad you're on here, John, and welcome. Thanks for being on here.
Hey, Roger. Awesome to see you again, and great to be on here with you.
Hey, your Healthy Gut program is one that we've talked about in previous interviews that we did, and I'm really excited to be able to share some information about that today. But we look at things differently. We look at someone's health based on how well or how poorly their different systems are working, what we call functional medicine, which is different from conventional medicine, which is really about pathology and disease. So today we're going to be talking about functional GI, problems. So we're going to be looking at the GI system, gastrointestinal system, from a functional medicine perspective rather than a conventional medicine perspective. But John, how would you describe functional medicine to someone that maybe has never heard that term?
Well, it's a great question. This term is gaining, more and more popularity, and more people are trying to figure out what it's all about. And really, the way I look at functional medicine is that it's a very patient-centered approach. It's leveraging technology to use some of the best laboratory testing out there to really gain insights. I call these roadmaps with my patients, and to gain these blueprints so that we can help sculpt a very tailored, patient-centered treatment. And so as opposed to just treating the label, for example, if somebody was given a label of, let's say, colitis or arthritis, for example, we're not just treating what that disease is. We're actually trying to figure out what are the underlying blind spots, what are the underlying triggers, what are the underlying causes from a holistic perspective that make that disease, start to manifest in each person.
One of the founding fathers of functional medicine, Sidney Baker, I'm not sure if you know that name, but Sidney Baker, and of course, Jeffrey Bland, I know you know Jeffrey, but, they describe it as good medicine. And, not to step on anybody's toes. I mean, thank goodness we have conventional medicine, but I think the point you're making is oftentimes in conventional medicine, it's about giving someone a diagnosis based on their symptoms. And then it's really oftentimes really about treating the symptoms. And there's certainly a time and a place for that. But in functional medicine, I think we would agree, as you just mentioned, it's all about being patient-centered and looking at what are the underlying causes of these symptoms, which are really just warning signs. That's all they are. So, so if we look at someone that has some bloating and gas and indigestion, and maybe they're having some problems with their bowel movements, a lot of times they just get the diagnosis of irritable bowel, but that doesn't serve them very well, does it?
No, and I look at those symptoms almost like having the check engine light of your car coming on. And the irony, or maybe the sad irony here, is that most of us pay a lot of attention to our cars, and when that check engine light comes on, we rush to the mechanic. But oftentimes we let these symptoms go, and they go and they go for us, whether it's the symptoms of irritable bowel syndrome or IBS, and those are all clues that are telling us that something is up. We've got to take it, to the mechanic, and we've got to start to diagnose the problem and get to the root of the issue. When your check engine light comes on in your car, you don't unscrew the light bulb of that light, right? You take that as a warning, you heed that warning, and you take it to a professional who can help you solve the problem. So I think what we need to do is stop accepting, and not everybody does this, but I find that a lot of patients are surprised to know how good they can actually feel when we start to actually listen to what our body's saying. Oh, you mean it's not normal to be constipated for 2 weeks? Oh, it's not normal to have reflux? It's not normal to be achy and in pain my whole life?
Yeah.
So, I think if we just start to say, hey, these are symptoms that are basically little flags waving, saying, pay attention to me. And now it's time to start to do the digging and figure out why those symptoms are there.
I think that's so true. And, I think, and again, I mentioned Jeffrey Bland, who I just remember this so vividly. He said the walking wounded. So a lot of people are walking around and they think it's normal, as you mentioned, to be constipated, to have bloating and gas, indigestion, to be able to eat maybe 6 foods and that's it, because they can't eat anything else without it setting off their reflux or whatever it is. People just accept that, and that is something that people don't realize, that they shouldn't accept that. Those are just warning signs that something's not working right in their body. And so we're when you start looking at the GI system, do you think, well, I'll just ask you, where do you start? If you've got symptoms, these warning signs, whether that's the bloating, the gas, or stomach pain or loose bowel movements, or, where do you start as a physician to start looking for the underlying causes? Is that diet, or is that supplements or lifestyle? Where do you start, John?
Yeah, a lot of those things are very common denominators. Where we actually start is before we meet our patient. We send our patient out a very detailed questionnaire, and I call this the audit, because this can take oftentimes 1 to 2 hours or more to fill out. So it's incredibly in depth. And so what this allows me to do is almost triage my patient before I meet them to see what systems I need to focus on. For example, I could have 5 IBS patients in front of me, and they could all have it for very, very different reasons. So we've got to start to figure out, okay, what are the priorities to start to investigate? And that's really why people come to work with functional medicine doctors like yourself, is to really understand where's the data points. Let's take the guesswork off the table now. Let's really start to get some idea here. And that's why you and I will be running certain labs. And I spend a lot of time looking at food right from the get-go. Spend a lot of time looking and measuring how somebody is responding to foods. Yes, we're always going to see the short list of foods that seems to be growing, forever longer right now, of things to avoid, whether it's nightshades or gluten or dairy or soy. These are all very important things that seem to have a lot of clout when it comes to chronic illness, especially inflammatory-based conditions. But we also can have an immune response that's very unique and specific to a completely different type of food that we would never know. So we do a lot of food analysis with our patients. We do a lot of antibody testing, and there's different antibodies that can give you different information, often from a very simple blood test, whether that's an IgG, IgM, or an IgA, even sometimes IgE antibodies. And these are things that the listeners can, you can take this to your primary caregiver, but oftentimes those aren't necessarily done to the extent of what they need to be done with an allopathic MD. And I'd say this very respectfully. I have a lot of MDs as patients, and I have a lot of MDs as colleagues that we work together with. But we come at it differently, and we really want to understand that inflammatory response, whether we're talking about gut issues or fibromyalgia or any form of chronic inflammatory condition. And you and I both know that inflammation is the root cause of a lot of situations. So we will often start by looking at what somebody eats, because that you have so much control about that, right? You can vote with your fork. And so we want to make sure that we're giving patients very appropriate guidelines for that. And then And often at the same time, we're doing a very in-depth analysis of their microbiome. We are looking at things such as bacteria, such as yeast, parasites potentially, even viruses. And we're really trying to understand what that collective is, which is known as the gut microbiome, and how that is functioning. Because over time, and we're seeing this a lot in the clinical research and clinically, that there are lots of daily, what I call micro assaults that can really affect your microbiome. Whether that's being on any medications, those could be as simple as NSAIDs, or all the way up to antibiotics and other, biologics and so forth. Those are showing to have an impact on your microbiome. Mm-hmm. We're seeing that environmental toxins, things that are present in our home, present in our workplace, present in the outdoors, these have a role to play. We even see that the power of our thought can control our microbiome in a beneficial or in a detracting way. So we've really got to take a whole big step back and really start to understand what is going on with this person. And there's a few other things that we will eventually start to talk about today, but those are really essential things to understand. Does this person have leaky gut syndrome? Does this person have SIBO? Do they have chronic subtle inflammatory markers that just aren't coming up in a standard blood test, but are very specific in some of the more in-depth stool testing and analysis that we do? So that's just a couple of real big hitters right out of the gates.
And you can see, quickly that it's pretty complicated. I mean, there's all sorts of things that can show up. And that makes it a challenge both for the patient and also for the physician. But you mentioned microbiome, and you and I, we throw that term around a lot. But some people, even though they may have heard it, don't really understand what is the microbiome and why is it so important?
Well, we actually have microbiomes all over our body, and I'll break them down what they are, but they're a collective of these organisms that I alluded to earlier. They could be yeast or bacteria, possibly other bugs that aren't so great, like parasites and viruses as well. But we have microbiomes on our skin, we have them in our eye and our nasal passages, but the biggest, and in my opinion, probably the most impactful microbiome in your body is the gut microbiome. Yeah. And this is, and you and I both know the impact that this can have, but I'll just throw a couple of very interesting stats out that they may not be new to some of your listeners, but look at your whole body, stand in front of the mirror, look at all your limbs, imagine all your bones and your soft tissue and all your blood cells. Take all those cells that make you collectively you and times that number by 10. That is how much we are outnumbered 10 to 1, bacteria and microorganisms to our human cells. So what that means is that we have more bacteria in our body than we've got human cells. But what's even more impactful, in my opinion, is the actual genetic component. If you take all of your genetic material as a human and you times that number by 100, that's how much is going on with our microbial genetic material inside of our gut alone. So we're actually technically more, what I would say, genetically a bacteria or a bug than we are human in a way. And it sounds really funny to say that, but we are outnumbered significantly. So the impact that we have on that microbiome plays a tremendous role in how our genetics express. And this is something called epigenetics. And this is something that we have a lot of control with, what's going on in our body and how our body will actually express the genes that we've been given.
And what's fascinating is, and then the researchers really started to catch up with this, is that it's all connected. This is something that, those of us in holistic functional medicine, we've said for years, is that it's all connected. You can't treat little bitty parts of the body. It's all connected. And for years, no one really put together that your gut was connected to your brain. But now we know without a doubt, there are particular bacteria that may help you be less depressed or less anxious, and that your gut definitely is connected to your brain. I mean, you have more serotonin receptors in your intestinal tract than you do in your brain. And that's one reason why you get, when you get nervous, you get butterflies in your stomach, right? So it's all connected, right?
Oh, most definitely. I mean, we've got our main brain, which is known as our central nervous system, which connects to your spinal column. But that is directly connected to our second brain, which is called our enteric nervous system, which you just alluded to, which is the gut brain, if you will. And they are sending, like every second, there's dozens and dozens of signals going up and down, back and forth between both brains. So we are connected. You're absolutely right. We've got to always make sure that we're coming at this holistically.
And then I think that's one of the things that's really fascinating too, is that your gut really is your first line of defense for your immune system. I mean, really, you're eating foods every day that, you're taking in bad bacteria. You could be getting parasites. You could be, mycoplasma, all sorts of things that you're introducing to your body. And the first line of defense oftentimes is your gut, right?
Most definitely. And that to me, again, is such a critical reason why that if you are dealing with any chronic condition, it doesn't have to be, we're talking a lot about gut issues today, but it doesn't have to be just a gut diagnosis. If you have psoriasis, if you've got thyroid issues, if you've got rheumatoid arthritis, if you've got fibromyalgia, there's so much research connecting the gut to all of these conditions that we have to take a real strong look at creating that foundation. And to me, the gut is really the starting point, and then working our way out from that. And, this is why we don't just see gut patients in our clinic, but primarily that's what we're known for is autoimmune and gut issues. But we've got to make sure that we're really establishing where 80% or more of your immune system lies, which is in your intestinal tract. That's where, as you alluded to, a lot of our neurotransmitters are made. But this is where some of our nutrients are actually produced, not just absorbed, but they're actually produced in our gut by certain types of bacteria. So we'll actually measure our patients' nutrient levels before and after treatment to really get a full comprehensive idea of what's going on with true deficiencies. And sometimes we have to go a little bit deeper than a traditional blood test to do that. We actually have to do what's called an intracellular analysis, and sometimes you can bridge what are called organic acids to give you some insights as well. But those are collectively starting to understand a little bit more of the deeper levels of deficiencies that might be occurring.
You mentioned earlier about, we're talking about diet and food allergies. You kind of brought that up a little bit. And I find that anybody with an autoimmune disease, really that's the place to start, is to look at, do you have any food allergies that may be driving this inflammation and driving leaky gut, which we haven't talked about yet, but we will in a moment. But I find 30 years in practice and testing people with food allergies for the last 20 years, everybody's got at least 6 foods that they're eating on a consistent basis, because normally eat the same things every day, every week, but they have probably minimum of 6 things that they're eating day in and day out that are potentially, because they have an allergic reaction to it, we see it on tests, that potentially can be driving the inflammation or driving the symptoms that they're dealing with. Food allergies are the great masqueraders. They can cause all sorts of different symptoms, whether that's GI disturbances, bloating, gas, indigestion, loose bowel movements, constipation, low moods, anxiety, fatigue, joint pain. You name it, food allergies can contribute or be the trigger to all these different symptoms.
Definitely. Yeah. And it's so important to make sure that you are putting the right information into your body. And that's really what food is, it's information.
Yeah.
And, oftentimes we are very much, and addicted is a strong word, but we're very much attached to foods that create the stronger amounts of inflammatory processes, because your body releases endorphins as a response, and you get this almost craving-like effect that can happen.
Yeah. So food allergy testing, I think, is invaluable. If with anybody with any health condition, in particular, someone has an autoimmune disease, but anybody who has a chronic health condition, they should get food allergy testing. That's something that I've learned the hard way. John, what do you think about elimination diets? Is that something that you do in your practice, elimination diets?
We do to an extent. A lot of patients have come to us after they've been to many doctors, and this is not a new thing for them. So we tend to do a much more deeper dive right away, just to help them out and really understand the nuances of their reactions. But it's a helpful tool. If somebody can't see a functional medicine doc and they can't, get in to start this type of testing or analysis right away, that's a great spot to begin. And it does help the masses by and large. But a lot of the people who are suffering out there are people that have fallen through the cracks. And the usual books that they read, the usual things that they're hearing on TV or whatnot to help their health just aren't applying to them. And so sometimes we really just have to customize that a bit further.
Yeah, I think the elimination diet where you're for what I use is you eliminate dairy and soy and gluten, wheat, barley, spelt, millet, anything that gluten would be in, eggs. There's a few other nightshades, as you mentioned earlier. I think that can be really helpful for somebody just to put their toes in the water, do an elimination diet for 2 to 4 weeks, take all those foods out, and then add them back one at a time every 3 days to see if they have a reaction. Now, it may take three days, a delayed reaction, before you see some type of symptom, whether that's bloating or gas or migraine headache or, whatever it is. But nothing to me can take the place of the food allergy test. I mean, the elimination diet is good, but if you really want to know, then the food allergy test is the way to go, even though it is only probably about 80% accurate.
That's right. There's some interpretation that's involved. There is no perfect one test in the world, for that matter, for anything, but especially for food testing, there's got to be some interpretation, because there are definitely some false positives and false negatives that we need to interpret accordingly.
Well, as a GI expert, and you definitely are a GI expert, what diet? I mean, if you were just to throw out, hey, this is what my family eats, or this is what I would recommend as a good go-to day in, day out healthy diet, what is that? What would that look like?
It would be one that is very cautious with the amount of grains that are consumed and the amount of pasteurized dairy to start. So, we tend to try and avoid a lot of the labelings of this is the best diet in our clinic, because we're trying to customize it, but we're taking a lot of pieces from the paleo type diet without becoming just a carnivore, if you will. And really starting to understand the nuances of not just about gluten, but in a sense, a lot of other grains can create this inflammatory response as well. And so we spend a lot of time looking at how somebody's responding to grains, and dairy is another one, and pasteurized dairy specifically is a big one to look at. And because there's a lot of issues with the pasteurization that could be impacting your gut lining, let alone what that livestock was fed, whether it was a cow, sheep, or a goat or whatnot, and then how that milk was processed and so forth. There's lots of scenarios where grains and dairy can really be an impact for us. So we spend a lot of time trying to be very careful with that. One other thing to look at, and we talked a little bit about, were the nightshades, and those do get a lot of bad rap, and not everybody's completely reactive to those, but they do have different compounds in them that are separate from a food sensitivity, if you will, that can create this inflammatory process. So, food testing is very helpful, but we still have to take a step back and talk about the common sense thing. So we often will take people off of gluten specifically, but sometimes even a bit further, because what's very fascinating, and there's some really interesting research right now, is, we can measure probably a handful of gluten grains, but there are dozens and dozens of gluten proteins that are out there that we can't measure that effectively through the standard testing that's available. And the research shows that there can be over 200 different coding proteins for gluten, and they're often just scattered in a lot of these grains, and sometimes even certain nuts and seeds. So we've got to be careful a little bit about that. So all the way back to your question, if I had to really kind of look at one thing from a gut perspective, and believe me, it doesn't help everybody, but the paleo diet is something to really consider, but we really customize that to patients. We don't just load them up on red meat and say go. We don't just load them up on a couple of items. But we are looking at healthy proteins, healthy fats, and really making sure that we're careful with some of these legumes and grains.
Okay, so put you on the spot here. So somebody comes in and their complaint is bloating, gas, indigestion, and they've been diagnosed with GERD or heartburn, reflux. And I know you're going to do testing, and you've already, before they come in, you've already put them through a battery of tests, or not tests, I'm sorry, a questionnaire where you can really kind of see what's going on with them. But where would you start generally, just kind of a general idea, if you didn't have tests, if someone had reflux, what would be some of the things that you would recommend that could help them with that reflux?
With no question, right out of the gate, we are totting up that diet right away to get off of the gluten, get off the dairy, making sure that they're getting off of processed foods in general. These are very logical things that aren't a surprise to hear, but it's amazing how we still eat these things, and we're still bombarded by these everywhere. So we really, if we didn't have any chance to do a single test right now, and I only had one shot with this patient for about 20 minutes, I'd say, look, get off of those foods immediately. I want you to start chewing your food. 33% of your digestion starts here, and we are all chronically in a rush these days, more so than ever. We also got to put our body in what's called the rest and digest. So I have what I call my eating hygiene big three, and these are just three big tips right away. Chew your food, be chill when you're eating, because you can't be in the fight or flight and the rest and digest at the same time. Pick one. If you want to, if you want to get your deadline done and go up and do your speech or whatever that is, do that, but don't do it with a sandwich in your hand. Okay. So make sure that your body is capable of digesting that information as it's coming down, but it's only going to be digested if it's chewed. And the third thing is make sure that you're not gulping tons of fluids when you're eating. This is going to dilute a lot of the natural digestive enzymes and digestive juices that are going on, whether it's bile, whether it's chyme that creates a very nice digestive impact, and the hydrochloric acid. If we're diluting those are things that are going to make it a lot tougher to break things down. So here we are eating foods that are very hard to digest from the get-go. Then we're putting our body into, we're not really breaking down those foods very well, and then we're not in the proper digestive mode. Those are all things that really set us back. And most of the times, those things alone are really going to get us, 60%, 50% of the way there. And again, if I wasn't able to do any testing, I would also say do this. Make sure that you are on some form of a digestive enzyme right away. And you've mentioned GERD. And the other thing is definitely have a look at how your body responds to hydrochloric acid. And this is often in a form of called betaine HCl. And this is a simple test. You can take these tablets, and if your GERD immediately gets worse, then we know that your body doesn't need any more hydrochloric acid in there. But it's amazing the amount of people who have GERD or reflux or even heartburn that are told that they need to be on these acid blockers because they have too much acid. Well, the problem for the majority of people is that it's actually too much acid in the wrong area. It's not that you have too much acid in your stomach. It's just that your body hasn't digested things well. So this critical mass of fluid is pushed up to an area that's not as protected, and you're getting these GERD and reflux-like symptoms. So that little test of taking some HCl tablets, and always talk to your doctor before doing any of these things. But these are things that are going to start to give you some insights right away if you need that at a bit more of a continuous level or not.
We're told that you are what you eat. And we get jaded to that, right? I mean, because we just, we've heard it so many times, probably over the years, but it's really true. I mean, what you eat turns into your hormones. It turns into your different cells the body needs to work at optimal levels. Your skin, the way you look, your skin, your hair, everything is dependent on how healthy your diet is. But just as important is how well you're digesting the foods that you eat. I mean, you can eat, or try to eat just as healthy as you can, but if you're not digesting your food and not getting the nutrients out of there, it's not doing much good at all, is it?
Well, this is why we say, that is the old adage, you are what you eat, but it's you are what you absorb.
Yeah.
And that's really where we have to sometimes take a step back and say, okay, is this person actually capable of absorbing the information that's being brought in? Or is there a lot of interference because there's a yeast overgrowth, or they have SIBO in their small bowel? SIBO stands for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and that can be measured through a very specific breath test. Or do they have leaky gut? Signs of that, those tight junctions, which are literally like the channels that are very selective to let nice nutrients into your bloodstream. Mm-hmm. They've been blown open, and now anything can get through. And that could be toxins, that could be undigested food particles. And these are all things that just create a massive amount of inflammation throughout our body, but also really interfere with the level of absorption of the nutrients in the first place.
And it's kind of a vicious cycle. I think that sometimes that people, because they're not digesting their food, maybe as you mentioned, they're deficient in certain digestive enzymes, or their stomach acid's been depleted from eating processed foods over the years, or drinking a lot of fluids when they're trying to eat. They kind of self-sabotage the whole digestive process by doing that. But then they start to develop nutritional deficiencies that make their condition even worse, like magnesium deficiency, which then one of the symptoms of magnesium deficiency oftentimes is constipation. I can't tell you, and I'm sure you had this happen as well. I mean, numerous patients that come to me with complaints of being diagnosed with IBS, constipation, IBS-C, and their only problem is they're just not getting enough magnesium. Once they start supplementing with magnesium and a digestive enzyme, I think it's very important, they start having a normal bowel movement. And, for years and years, they've been plagued with this constipation and the bloating and the gas and everything that goes with that. And all it took was adding some over-the-counter magnesium supplements, and now they're regular. Sometimes
it is that simple.
Yeah, it can be. Not always, But yeah,
Yeah.
oftentimes it is that simple. Hey, well, listen, but before we finish up, I want to talk a little bit about leaky gut. I mean, this is a term that people are hearing more and more about. Our friend Josh Axe, I think, kind of put it on the map a few years ago. But you and I have been talking about leaky gut. I know I had a whole chapter in my book in 2003 all about leaky gut. So it's something that in functional medicine we've been talking about for years and years, but now it's starting to get on the radar, and people are hearing that term, but I don't think they still really understand why. Number one, it's very important to understand it. And then number two, why is conventional medicine really not talk much about leaky gut?
Well, you're right. It has been on the map, and Dr. Axe did a great job really kind of bringing that to the forefront. But there's been a lot of researchers doing this for a while now, and it really is becoming much more than just a buzzword and a trend. It really is something that we need to look at. In the scientific world, they call it intestinal permeability. And so we can actually start to understand through different types of testing, is this something that we should be looking for, as opposed to just this theory that we've thrown out there? Because there are biomarkers that can give us a sense of what the state of permeability is. And I alluded to you earlier about these channels. A better analogy is if you think of almost like a cheesecloth, and you're straining stuff through that cheesecloth. Yeah, nice liquid comes out the end of that, and you're separating all the harder, maybe non-desirables stay in the cloth. Mm-hmm. What happens if that cheesecloth has some holes in it? And the bigger the hole, the bigger the problem. Chunks are going to fall through. And so we want to make sure that we're understanding that our gut lining can literally only be one cell thick at its thinnest point in our body between our bloodstream and our gut. So if there's some integrity issues there, that could potentially have a drastic role to play with our health. And so these little tight junctions, and another way of thinking of them is almost like the bricks and mortar of your wall, right? Mm-hmm. The bricks are the cells, the mortar is that tiny little channel. And if somebody knocks those bricks out with a hammer, you've got some big gaping holes. And again, you're going to get undesirables entering into your home. We've got to have a very selective channel, bring that back together to keep the undesirables and get those out through our bowel movements and our excretion pathways, but allow our body to absorb the nutrients that are coming from the food in the first place. So that is a high level look at what leaky gut is. And there are common things that create it. And I think I touched on some of these, but I'll just go over a few of them again. Medications are commonly something to be aware of. Chronic stress. This is something that we haven't touched it too much on, but this is a big factor for creating a lot of these inflammatory molecules that almost like if you were to just rub, take your hand and just start rubbing it, nothing happens, right? What if I do that for 2 hours? That's going to be a really raw, oozy, not very comfortable spot. So a lot of us are consuming these foods that we've talked about, breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, these foods that are potentially very irritating to our body. And it's almost like rubbing sandpaper on your gut. It just starts to erode and really create these micro assaults that can start to really stack up. So that's why sometimes it's not always so dramatic. This is where one of the pain points with functional medicine is that it sometimes takes time. And often it does, the more chronic the condition, because there's usually more than one moving part. It's usually a collection of a number of them. I call it the perfect storm that comes together. Specifically, the more complex the case, usually the more moving parts are out of balance. So if we can start to really understand what's going on with some of the things that we've alluded to, food, medications, microbiome, toxins that could be in our environment, such as mold, you alluded to mycotoxins, heavy metals are something that we also look at. And then really starting to knock that stuff out of the way. So you just get out of your way and let your body start to heal. You give it a chance to heal. It's amazing what can happen.
Well, as we wrap up, I think one of the things I want to mention, I think one of the most important things that came out of this interview was the emphasis you placed on someone's overall health is really dictated by their gut health. I mean, you really can't separate those two, right? I mean, for someone to really be as healthy as maybe they desire, that you really got to make sure that the gut is healthy to be able to accomplish that.
Absolutely. I think if we look at a lot of the chronic illness that's out there, there's going to be a direct connection at some point to inflammation. And whether you're in pain or not, that's a lot of us what deem inflammation is, but even cancer to a degree is inflammation caused. And so if we can really start to nip some of these underlying inflammatory triggers, get those out of the way, put the fire extinguisher on those, not in a suppressive way, but more in a curative way, then we can really start to see our body get snapped back into this homeostasis over time. And it often will take a lot of those things to come together to fully get our body back into balance.
Yeah, I think most of us would agree that the two drivers of poor health are stress and inflammation. I mean, if you look at just about any chronic illness that's out there, those are the two main triggers that really keep somebody in that chronic poor health state. And anything you can do to start to help your body to be able to heal itself, and then the whole thing chiropractic, going through chiropractic education was that it was emphasized that we're all born with an innate healing ability. This is something that we're just given. We have that, and we have a new stomach lining every few days with the actual cells that contact food being renewed every 5 minutes. So we have the ability to self-heal, but we have to do things that allow the body to be able to heal itself. And changing your diet, looking at the microbiome, digestive enzymes, things that have become nutritional deficiencies. These are all things that can sabotage the body from being able to do what it's designed to do, which is to run itself in a way that allows us to be healthy.
Couldn't agree more.
Hey, John, tell me, as we're going to wrap up right here, and I want to know, tell me a little bit more about your good gut health, healthy gut health program. I kind of blew that, but tell us about that. It's a mouthful right now this morning, but tell me a little bit about that program, because I remember talking to you about it, I guess, year before last in one of our interviews, and I thought, wow, this is something that people really would benefit from if they have a gut problem, or really anybody who wants to be as healthy as they can to go through this program. So tell us a little bit about that program as we wrap up.
Well, thanks, Raj. Yeah, this is my Healthy Gut Institute program. And if you ever want to learn more about it, just search the Healthy Gut Institute. And really what it is, if this passion came, you mentioned one of our friends earlier, Dr. Josh Axe. This project came from a big conversation I had with Josh many years ago. And he really encouraged me to do this, is to put together a very comprehensive program to help you at home to start to begin to heal your gut, so that whether you're dealing with inflammatory pain issues, or you're dealing with digestive issues, or any other of the conditions we touched on potentially, this is the starting point to your healing. And a lot of us right now, specifically, we're a little bit more isolated than we used to be, and hopefully that's changing very soon. But this is the time to really start to double down on your health, become an advocate for your health. And there's no better place to do this than from your laptop at home or at work, wherever you are. This now reduces the barrier to that. So we really worked hard at putting this together, and we've had some really powerful speakers come on board and really give us the kudos to say, hey, what you guys are doing here is is helping a lot of people. So we call this the Healthy Gut Institute. It's based on my HEAL methodology, HEAL, and we have 7 modules. And you'll see, it's just very easy. You just go through it at your own speed. There's no particular order. You can binge it all at once, or you can do it in flow, and it really will give you the starting point to get addressing some of the things that might not be so obvious. We have a whole topic on talking about thyroid and how that can impact your health. Who would have thought that this little organ up here has a big role to play with your digestive health? Well, it does, and a lot of that gets overlooked. We talk a lot about things to eliminate, things to add, certain foods to be very careful of, and you and I have touched on a couple today, but there's often a few others that we really want to look at. And we give people that are our members, we give them all sorts of downloadable assets, videos, and different tools that they can use literally from day one.
Hey, John, and I know it's incredibly thorough. Tell me again now, what is the best website? Where do they go to learn more about that and learn more about you? I know you got a lot of free resources on your website too, right?
Well, they can actually access it directly from my website, and that's probably a good spot, because we have lots of free resources on there as well. And that's thedempsterclinic.com. Once again, that's www.thedempsterclinic.com. And you'll see there's a section there for the Healthy Gut Institute, and you can certainly connect it from there.
Hey, John, this has been great. I know everyone that's watched this has gotten some clinical pearls, and they're thinking about, oh, golly, I need to see about getting food allergy testing, or wow, maybe I need to give up gluten, or, so this probably triggered a lot of, hopefully not stress. I was going to say stress because they're thinking, oh no, what do I do? But you've got it all on your website. So I just encourage people to check out your website. And John, it's always a delight to spend time with you. And you're one of the sharpest guys I know. And thanks so much for joining me here today. I really appreciate it.
Hey, Roger, thank you for having me on. I liked what you just mentioned there, because I'm going to leave your listeners with this. It's not about perfection. You don't need to do everything all at once, but you do need to make progress if you like to see change. And so I usually say, look, this can be like drinking out of a fire hydrant sometimes, and don't feel like it needs to be. Take one little step today, take one little step tomorrow, and make progress. It's not about perfection. It's about progress. And if you just remember that, the overwhelm can start to come down a bit.
Absolutely. John, have a great day. Good to see you.
Take care, Raj. Bye-bye now.